A girl's life ended the moment she was treated as a transaction instead of a human. Isabella Moretti was a 22-year-old woman from Chicago, surviving in a life built on financial struggle and emotional exhaustion. Every day felt like a cycle of survival rather than living. Long work shifts, overdue bills, and a home that no longer carried comfort, only pressure. Her future, once filled with quiet hopes, had slowly been reduced to responsibilities she never chose. The root of everything was her father's gambling addiction. What began as small risks turned into dangerous debts that grew beyond control. Unknown callers became frequent. Silent visitors appeared near their home. Fear began living in the background of their lives long before Isabella understood its source. The debt was no longer personal. It had become part of a system that operated with silence and certainty. Men who enforced it did not shout or threaten loudly. They simply arrived, and their presence meant the decision had already been made. Isabella learned the truth too late. In a final attempt to escape consequences, her father made a secret arrangement with people who treated debt like ownership. He did not ask for help. He negotiated survival. And the price was not money. It was her. Isabella was not asked. She was assigned. Treated as repayment for something she never participated in. When the reality finally reached her, it did not feel real at first. It felt like misunderstanding, until silence proved otherwise. The men came without urgency because they did not need it. Their movements were controlled, precise, and final. No explanations were offered, no negotiations allowed. The environment of her home shifted instantly, as if ownership had changed hands without needing permission. Isabella tried to resist in words, but the system around her did not respond to emotion. It responded only to outcome. Every attempt to speak felt like it was absorbed by something larger than her voice. Outside, the world remained unchanged. Cars passed. Lights stayed on. Life continued normally, as if nothing had shifted. That contrast made everything worse, because her disappearance was not dramatic enough for the world to notice. She was taken into a vehicle that did not reveal its destination. The city slowly disappeared behind her, replaced by long stretches of road and unfamiliar silence. Fear did not arrive immediately. It built gradually, growing stronger with every mile that separated her from anything familiar. By the time the vehicle slowed, there was nothing left of certainty. Massive gates rose ahead, cold and absolute, marking the entrance to a place that did not belong to her world. They opened slowly, and she was told she now belonged to Don Alessandro Vieri. The man who bought her life was more dangerous than she imagined. Don Alessandro Vieri was not a man who needed introductions in the world Isabella had just entered. His name carried weight in places where laws did not decide outcomes, only influence did. To the outside world, he was a businessman tied to shipping companies, import networks, and international logistics firms. But beneath that surface existed something far more controlled and feared, an empire built through ports, silent agreements, and underground systems that operated without visibility. Alessandro was known for something more unsettling than violence. He was known for restraint. His reputation was not built on chaos, but on precision. Entire operations shifted when his attention turned toward them, and problems disappeared before they ever reached public awareness. In his world, emotion was considered weakness, and hesitation was treated as risk. Isabella was brought into his private estate without ceremony. The property itself reflected a contradiction, luxury shaped with absolute control. Long corridors, polished stone floors, and modern architecture surrounded by security layers that made escape feel like an idea that had already been denied. No one explained anything to her. No one needed to. The structure of the place communicated its rules through silence, movement, and presence. Servants avoided eye contact. Guards positioned themselves in patterns that made boundaries clear without speaking them. And Alessandro observed everything without saying a word. Isabella felt it immediately, the weight of being watched not as a guest, but as something being assessed. Not judged emotionally, but evaluated structurally, as if her presence had entered a system that needed classification. His men treated him differently than anyone else. Even their silence carried discipline. They did not question him. They adjusted to him. Every movement in his presence was careful, as if even breathing too loudly could become a mistake. At one point, Isabella noticed him reviewing a detailed file containing her background. Pages turned slowly, methodically, as if every detail mattered more than it should. He did not react emotionally to anything he read. No expression changed, no curiosity showed openly. Only calculation remained visible. Yet there was something inconsistent beneath that control. A subtle pause when certain sections of her file appeared. As if something in her history did not match what he expected. It became clear that he had not been the one who personally ordered her acquisition. That detail shifted everything without being spoken. Isabella was not standing in front of the source of her fate, she was standing inside a system that even he did not fully command. She tried to understand her position, but answers did not exist in words. They existed in structure. And that structure made one thing clear: she was legally and financially trapped within his world, with no external exit remaining. When Alessandro finally gave instruction, it was brief and absolute. She was assigned to his private residence wing. No explanation followed. As she was guided away, Isabella noticed something she could not ignore. He did not look at her like property. He looked at her like a mystery he had not solved yet. Freedom feels impossible when your cage is more beautiful than the outside world. Isabella Moretti slowly adapted to life inside Don Alessandro Vieri's mansion, but adaptation felt like surrender in disguise. The estate was breathtaking, modern luxury blended with old-world power. Crystal lighting, marble corridors, and vast glass walls opened toward perfectly maintained gardens. Yet none of it felt free. Everything felt positioned, measured, and controlled. She was not mistreated. That was what made it worse. She was fed, dressed, and given space, but never autonomy. Every hallway she walked had silent guards stationed at calculated intervals. Cameras were present even when invisible. Doors did not lock her in physically. They simply made sure she never forgot she was being watched. Isabella tried to find gaps in the system. She tested routines, observed patrol timing, and mentally mapped exits. But every attempt ended the same way: the realization that the mansion was designed not to imprison her body, but to anticipate her thoughts. Even communication was shaped by silence. Servants responded politely but never revealed anything personal. Questions about Alessandro were met with subtle avoidance. It became clear quickly that speaking about him was not forbidden. It was simply avoided as if his life existed outside conversation itself. The isolation began to press deeper than fear. Days passed with no meaningful interaction, only structured routines that made time feel suspended. Isabella was no longer reacting to events. She was existing inside a controlled environment that adjusted itself around her presence. Then she saw him. From a distance, through partially open doors and secured glass partitions, Alessandro Vieri conducted his world like a system running without emotion. Meetings happened through encrypted screens. Voices on calls were cut off sharply when they failed to meet his expectations. Entire operations shifted direction with minimal words from him. There was no anger. Only finality. People disappeared from conversations without warning. Decisions were executed instantly. And yet, within that same cold structure, Isabella began noticing inconsistencies. Small ones. A guard reassigned after standing too close to her wing. A schedule adjusted after her routine changed. Doors unlocked moments before she reached them, as if someone had already predicted her movement. It didn't feel like control meant to harm her. It felt like control meant to protect her. That contradiction unsettled her more than fear ever had. Whispers reached her indirectly, fragments of conversation between staff mentioning rival Mafia factions increasing pressure against Alessandro. His empire was under constant threat. Violence existed outside the mansion walls, even if she could not see it directly. Then, without warning, the entire estate changed. Security alarms activated. Lights shifted. Movement froze across corridors. A full lockdown sequence began without explanation. And for the first time since she arrived, Isabella heard urgency in the silence. Hours later, deep into the night, her door opened. Alessandro Vieri stepped inside her room for the first time at midnight. One moment of eye contact changed everything she thought she knew about him. When Alessandro Vieri entered her room during the lockdown, there was no force, no aggression, and no sign of chaos in his movement. Instead, there was controlled urgency, like a man operating within a situation he already understood but did not want to escalate unnecessarily. Isabella froze instantly. Every instinct expected punishment, confrontation, or punishment disguised as control. But nothing in his presence matched that expectation. He did not approach like a captor. He moved like someone ensuring stability in a system that had temporarily broken. He did not speak at first. His eyes scanned the room once, not searching for threats, but confirming her condition. Then he stepped closer, stopping at a distance that was close enough to make her aware of every breath she took. Outside the room, muffled movement echoed through the mansion. Guards were responding to something unseen, coordinating with precision. The threat was external, not internal. That detail mattered more than Isabella realized, because it meant she was not the target of the violence unfolding beyond the walls. Alessandro's attention remained on her. For the first time, Isabella noticed something different in him. Not softness, not warmth, but focus that did not feel detached. He was observing her reaction carefully, as if her fear itself mattered in a way it should not have. She tried to steady herself, but the proximity made it harder. Every instinct told her to step back, yet something in his presence stopped her from moving. Not command. Not threat. Something quieter. He noticed her fear response immediately. But he did not use it against her. That alone broke something in the pattern she had built in her mind about him. A shift began, subtle but real. Alessandro's expression remained controlled, but his attention lingered longer than necessary. Not on control, but on condition. On her safety. On ensuring she remained unharmed while everything outside the room destabilized. Then he gave orders through a secure device, short, precise instructions increasing security across the estate. His tone remained unchanged, but the decisions now included her protection as a priority. And yet, he still did not touch her. Did not claim her. Did not reduce her to anything simple. For the first time, Isabella felt something unfamiliar forming between silence and distance. A fragile understanding that he was not acting like someone who owned her, but like someone preventing something from reaching her. She did not understand why. And he did not explain. Instead, he turned slightly, ensuring the situation outside was being contained, while still keeping her within his awareness. Moments later, the external threat was neutralized violently by his men. The mansion settled back into controlled silence, as if nothing had happened at all. But Alessandro did not leave immediately. When he finally stepped back, Isabella saw it clearly. A trace of injury she had not noticed before. Alessandro Vieri was hurt. And somehow, it was because of her presence. He didn't just protect her anymore, he started watching her like she mattered. Alessandro Vieri returned after handling the attack situation without any visible urgency, but Isabella noticed immediately that something had changed. A light injury marked his presence, yet he dismissed it as if physical damage was irrelevant to him. There was no concern in his reaction, only control held tightly under pressure. But the tension inside him was different now. Not weaker, sharper. From that night onward, Alessandro's presence around her increased without explanation. He appeared in corridors where he was not expected, observed her routines from distances that felt accidental but never were. Isabella could no longer define her position clearly. She was no longer treated like a hostage kept in isolation. She was being monitored with intent that felt personal rather than procedural. It was not confinement anymore. It was attention. Alessandro began learning her habits without speaking. He noticed when she slept, when she avoided certain rooms, when she ate less than usual. Small adjustments started appearing around her environment. Slightly warmer lighting in her wing, different food choices, security rotations shifting subtly to match her movement patterns. He never acknowledged it. He only corrected it. Isabella struggled with the contradiction forming inside her. Fear still existed, but it was no longer pure. It was becoming tangled with dependency she did not want to admit. The world outside the mansion continued to react violently. Rival factions escalating pressure, unseen threats growing closer with each passing day. And then the shift became personal. Alessandro's enemies stopped targeting him directly. They began targeting her. The attacks were controlled, precise, and deliberately timed to test his response. Every time, Alessandro reacted with extreme efficiency, eliminating threats before they reached her physically. But the nature of his response was changing. It was no longer just strategic. It was protective in a way that felt emotional beneath restraint. Isabella began realizing something she could not ignore. She was no longer just inside his world. She was affecting it. His calm, calculated nature showed small fractures whenever her safety was involved. Decisions that should have remained cold became immediate. Delays that once existed disappeared completely when she was at risk. And then came the moment that changed everything. Inside a restricted security corridor, Isabella accidentally witnessed part of a live internal operation through a partially open door. Men were preparing something violent, something irreversible. Alessandro entered without warning and stopped the execution mid-order, his voice cutting through the room with absolute authority. Silence followed instantly. The decision was reversed. The operation halted. But what Isabella had seen inside that room had already been enough to change everything she understood. And Alessandro realized it too. Because she was not supposed to have seen any of it. The truth about her sale was never what she believed. Isabella Moretti's understanding of her own life began to fracture the moment she accessed hidden financial documents stored inside a restricted office terminal in the mansion's administrative wing. She had not been searching for answers at first, only escape routes, fragments of information, anything that could explain the structure she had been trapped inside. But what she found did not confirm her story. It rewrote it. The transaction that defined her entire captivity was not as simple as her father's gambling debt. The records showed multiple layers of financial manipulation, encrypted transfers, and intermediary signatures that did not belong to him. Her father had been involved, but not as the origin of the deal. He was only a broken link in a larger chain. The deeper logs revealed something more disturbing. A rival Mafia faction had inserted itself into the transaction, redirecting ownership, inflating debt structures, and engineering conditions that ensured Isabella would be pushed into the system regardless of her father's intent. She had not been sold. She had been positioned. And then her attention locked onto a name buried in the secondary authorization layer. Don Alessandro Vieri. The record suggested interference, controlled intervention that redirected her transfer away from rival custody routes. Not as a buyer in the traditional sense, but as someone who stepped into a system already designed to claim her. The emotional impact hit her in waves. Everything she believed about her father collapsed. Everything she believed about Alessandro shifted into uncertainty. When she confronted him later that night, Alessandro did not deny what she had discovered. He did not confirm it fully either. His silence carried weight that felt heavier than explanation. He only acknowledged fragments, enough to confirm that her past had never been stable and that multiple forces had shaped her situation long before she entered his estate. But he refused to clarify his full motive. That absence of clarity changed something between them. For the first time, Isabella's fear did not intensify. It softened. Not into safety, but into confusion layered with reluctant trust. Alessandro's behavior began shifting subtly after that moment. His presence became less observational and more intentional. Protective actions increased, but now they carried something personal beneath their structure. As if distance between them had become something he no longer maintained by default. But the outside world was not finished with them. Rival factions escalated their response immediately after detecting internal instability in Alessandro's network. Intelligence channels intercepted a new encrypted message, short, direct, and deliberately aimed. A targeted assassination directive had been issued. But not for him. The message was clear in its final classification. The target was no longer Don Alessandro Vieri. It was Isabella alone. She was no longer a captive. She was the reason a war began. The moment the assassination directive was confirmed, Alessandro Vieri's entire network shifted into silent motion. What had once been a controlled estate of power and secrecy transformed into a fortified command zone. Security protocols activated without delay, sealing every entrance, locking down internal corridors, and isolating Isabella Moretti in the most protected wing of the mansion. Outside, the world ignited. Enemy factions moved with coordinated aggression, striking supply routes, communication nodes, and perimeter defenses that surrounded Alessandro's territory. The mansion was no longer just a residence, it had become the center of a territorial war where silence no longer existed. Inside the secured chamber, Isabella felt the shift through the walls. Distant impacts. Rapid movement of guards. Tension so thick it felt physical. Every sound outside carried the weight of violence she could not see but instinctively understood. Fear reached its peak inside her, not of death, but of meaning. People were dying because she existed in this place. Alessandro refused every external demand to surrender her. Negotiations were not entertained. Offers were not considered. Every message sent to him was met with the same silent refusal. The situation would not be resolved through exchange. His empire responded accordingly. What followed was not chaos, it was structure executing force. Alessandro's organization deployed coordinated defensive units across the estate perimeter. Strategic strikes neutralized incoming threats with calculated precision. The war outside was not loud in the way she expected. It was controlled, efficient, and absolute. From a secured observation window, Isabella finally saw it, the scale of his power. Not just men with weapons, but a system of influence operating like an invisible machine, dismantling opposition in real time. But instead of reassurance, it brought guilt. The realization settled heavily. She was not inside a conflict. She was the cause of it. Driven by panic and responsibility, Isabella attempted to leave the protected wing, convinced that removing herself would end the violence. But Alessandro appeared instantly at the corridor entrance, stopping her without force, yet with undeniable authority. For the first time, their confrontation carried emotional weight rather than silence. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. Instead, he revealed the truth she had not understood yet. She was not being protected temporarily. She was under irreversible protection. And that meant the war was no longer negotiable. Before she could respond, alarms shifted tone across the estate. Defensive signals changed frequency. Movement outside became urgent, unstable. A breach had occurred. Enemy forces had penetrated the inner perimeter. And in the next instant, the first gunshot echoed inside the mansion itself. The man who never loved anyone became the one who refused to lose her. The moment gunfire breached the mansion's interior, Alessandro Vieri moved with a precision that no longer felt like command. It felt like instinct tied to something far deeper. The estate, once a symbol of controlled authority, turned into a live battlefield where every corridor echoed with the presence of intruders attempting to break through what he had decided was untouchable. Isabella Moretti was pulled behind cover before she could fully process the shift. Alessandro did not hesitate, did not calculate distance, did not weigh risk in the way he once would have. Every movement he made now carried one purpose: keeping her alive. What changed was not the violence outside. It was him. For the first time, Alessandro did not treat her as something that needed protection as a duty or obligation. The distance that once defined his control over situations no longer existed in the same form. His attention followed her constantly, not as surveillance, but as presence that mattered. Isabella noticed it in fragments. The way he positioned himself between her and danger without assigning others. The way his decisions shifted faster when she was in proximity. The way silence between them no longer felt empty, but weighted with something unspoken. Fear did not disappear from her, but it changed shape. It no longer centered on him. Trust began forming in the middle of collapsing walls and controlled chaos. Not because she understood everything, but because his actions no longer aligned with the image she had built of him as only a collector of power. Inside the mansion, the final wave of enemy forces was met with overwhelming response. Alessandro's organization closed every remaining breach with calculated efficiency. The conflict did not stretch endlessly. It ended decisively, as if the system itself refused to allow continuation once his focus had shifted. And then suddenly it stopped. Silence returned to the estate like a heavy aftermath. No more movement. No more intrusion. Only the fractured stillness of a space that had survived something violent and irreversible. Alessandro remained standing, bloodied but steady. His attention no longer scanning threats but returning to her. For the first time, he did not redirect her away from danger. He stayed. Not as a handler of situations, but as someone who had chosen where he would stand. He did not confess anything in words. He did not need to. Everything about his presence now communicated a decision that could not be undone. Isabella felt it too. Something inside her had shifted during the collapse of violence. She was no longer only someone taken or someone protected. She had become part of the space he refused to lose. Part of his world. The realization settled quietly. Love had not arrived through freedom, but through survival inside darkness that no longer felt entirely. Protection had transformed into connection. And connection into something neither of them had defined yet. But in the distance beyond the broken perimeter, a final transmission was intercepted. Cold, deliberate, and unmistakably directed. A new Mafia faction had entered the conflict. And their message carried only one intent. Revenge for the woman of Don Alessandro Vieri.